Three armed Russian MiG-31 fighters entered NATO airspace earlier today, on September 19th. Now, these MiG-31s reportedly flew into Estonian airspace on course toward the nation's capital of Tallinn, before circling inside the nation's airspace until they were intercepted by Italian F-35s deployed to Estonia in support of NATO's Baltic air policing mission. Now, the MiG-31s reportedly spent a total of 12 minutes inside Estonian airspace, with their transponders turned off, which seemingly demonstrates that this wasn't an accident, and really makes me reconsider my position that the Russian drone incursions into Poland and Romania in recent weeks may have been the result of incompetence rather than incredibly ill-advised probing operations. Now, this direct incursion into the airspace of a NATO ally certainly does seem like an intentional provocation, especially considering Estonia's capital is less than 100 miles away from the Russian border. That means even these jets could feasibly strike Estonia's capital with weapons like the Kinzhal air-launched ballistic missile without even leaving Russian airspace. So their presence over Estonia, then, was probably meant to send a message. Now, it does not appear that these aircraft were armed with Kinzhal missiles, but the MiG-31 is the primary platform used to deliver these weapons, making the choice to use MiG-31s for this incursion also seem pretty intentional. Kinzhal is a nuclear-capable weapon, after all, so the message Russia seems to be trying to send could be pretty clear. NATO should be very wary of Russian attacks, especially nuclear ones. So, the same thing that they've been repeating every week for more than 3 years now, except this time they hoped to intimidate one of the smallest militaries in the NATO alliance, a nation with no fighter aircraft of its own and fewer than 7,000 total active troops in the former Soviet state of Estonia, which has been a NATO ally since 2004. Now, the MiG-31 is to some extent an evolution of the MiG-25 that the West once believed was something of a superfighter, prompting the development of America's F-15 Eagle. The MiG-25 was known to reach extreme speeds, Mach 2.8 at high altitudes, and even Mach 3.2 if your engineers don't mind rebuilding the engines after. The MiG-31 does share a superficial resemblance to its Foxbat precursor, but made changes to both its material construction and aerodynamics to allow for sustained supersonic speeds at lower altitudes and, more importantly, added durability at the expense of top speed. It also came with improved avionics and a second seat in the cockpit for a weapons systems officer, allowing the jet to conduct more complex combat operations. Though, when I say improved, it is important to remember that even the more modern MiG-31 has been flying for a whole half-century now, so it's not exactly a cutting-edge piece of aviation technology. The MiG-31 BM has, however, seen a slew of pretty modern upgrades, including a new multi-mode radar, color multifunctional displays in the cockpit, and a digital data link. The MiG-31K is really a MiG-31 BM with modifications specifically to carry one Kinzhal air-launched ballistic missile under the center line of the fighter, a weapon that Russia tried to convince the world was a modern maneuverable hypersonic missile, but in reality is little more than an air-launched version of Russia's long-serving Iskander-M short-range ballistic missile. The modernized Zaslon-M radar in the MiG-31 is a phased array system with a claimed maximum engagement range of 280 kilometers, about 174 miles, according to Russian sources. But it is unlikely that these dated systems would be able to detect inbound F-35s, let alone engage them from anything close to beyond visual range, which is about 34 miles out. Now, this event has prompted Estonia to now follow in Poland's footsteps in invoking Article 4 of the NATO Charter, effectively calling for a meeting of leaders to discuss the increasing threat Russia poses. Thus far, Russia hasn't made any comment about this incursion into NATO airspace, but based on historical precedent, it seems likely to me that they'll deny it ever happened at all, while celebrating those pilots as heroes domestically, as Russia tends to do. As for what this pretty brazen act means, well, This is just my opinion, and I want to be clear on that, but I would assess this as a combination of probing action meant to provide some intelligence regarding NATO responses to Russian incursions, and threat normalization, something that we've seen out of Russia for decades, with military exercises like their semi-annual Zabad drills on NATO's eastern flank, where they simulate an invasion of Eastern Europe, or the near-constant flight of Russian bombers and fighters near American and NATO-allied airspace. Russia wants civilians and NATO nations to fear a Russian attack while claiming innocence on the geopolitical stage, like a petulant child wanting to see how far they can push you before you throw your hands up and just say, fine, you can have Ukraine if it'll make you stop. And if you're a parent like me, you already know all too well what happens when you give in to this tactic. If you surrender and let your kids have ice cream for dinner tonight, they don't stop wanting ice cream. And tomorrow, they're going to want it for lunch too. For now, we'll just have to wait and see how NATO responds.